I never expected a single glance across the room to change everything, but the way she looked at me made the world fall silent. It started so quietly, I almost missed it. A glance. A pause. A kind of stillness that doesn't belong in an ordinary evening. I was at the small gathering almost out of obligation, a friend's dinner, warm chatter, music low in the background, glasses clinking gently as conversations overlapped. I kept mostly to myself, smiling politely, half listening. But then I noticed her. She wasn't trying to draw attention, not at all. In fact, it was the way she seemed completely at ease in her own world that made me look twice. She stood near the corner of the room, speaking softly to someone, her voice carrying that quiet confidence of someone who knows who she is. Her laughter wasn't loud. It was measured, graceful, the kind that makes you want to hear it again just to feel the warmth behind it. Her presence felt different from everyone else's. Where others fidgeted or filled the silence with idle talk, she seemed grounded, like a calm current running beneath the noise. And then, for the first time, her eyes found mine. It wasn't long, a flicker, a second, maybe two. But in that fleeting moment, something passed between us. Not recognition exactly, but a subtle acknowledgement, as if she'd seen right through me, and for a brief instant, I was entirely visible. I looked away quickly, pretending to sip from my glass, but inside I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the kind that comes not from nerves alone, but from being disarmed. Later in the evening, I found myself watching her again without meaning to. The way her hand rested lightly against her wine glass, fingers moving absently as she listened. The way she leaned in closer when someone spoke, showing not just interest, but a rare attentiveness. She wasn't just beautiful, though she was, undeniably so, in that timeless way where grace outshines youth. She was striking because of her presence, the way she seemed to carry both confidence and a kind of unspoken vulnerability in the same breath. When she passed by me to reach for something on the table, the faintest brush of her sleeve grazed my arm. The contact was so slight, so accidental, yet it left a warmth against my skin that lingered long after she'd moved on. I caught a trace of her perfume, subtle, not sweet, but elegant and grounding. It was enough to stir something inside me I hadn't expected. And then she looked at me again. This time, her lips curved into the faintest smile, almost as though she knew I had been watching. Not mocking, not teasing, just a soft recognition. I should have looked away. I should have said something casual, something safe. But in that moment, words failed me. All I could do was return the smile, quietly, as if we had agreed on something neither of us dared to put into words just yet. That was how it began. Quietly. Almost imperceptibly. But it was enough. The second time our paths crossed that evening, it wasn't by accident. I had drifted to the quieter side of the room, where the noise softened and the conversations thinned out. I needed a moment to breathe, to gather myself after feeling so unexpectedly undone by a stranger's smile. And then, she was there. Not far, leaning lightly against the edge of the counter, her glass nearly empty, her eyes skimming the room as though she too needed a moment away. When she noticed me standing nearby, something shifted. She gave a polite nod, the kind you give when two people find themselves sharing the same small corner of a crowded space. But then she spoke first. "You don't seem like the kind who enjoys big gatherings," she said softly, her voice smooth but carrying that hint of curiosity that felt disarmingly personal. I laughed quietly, rubbing the back of my neck. "That obvious, huh?" Her smile widened, though not in amusement alone. It carried a kind of empathy. "I recognize it. I feel the same way most of the time." That was the beginning of our first real conversation. Nothing extraordinary, not at first. We talked about the food, the music, how we both preferred quieter nights to crowded rooms. Yet somehow, it didn't feel like small talk. There was a gentleness to the way she listened, her eyes never darting away, her focus fully on me as though nothing else in the room mattered. The more she spoke, the more I noticed the details, the subtle lilt in her voice, the graceful movement of her hands as she gestured, the way she leaned ever so slightly closer when I said something that made her laugh. Each detail pulled me in further, like threads weaving something invisible between us. At one point, someone called her name from across the room, and she turned her head, just briefly. Her hand, which had been resting on the counter, brushed against mine. It was light, almost nothing, but my skin burned where it happened. She didn't pull away quickly. Instead, her fingers lingered for a breath too long, not enough to be obvious, but enough to feel intentional. I swallowed hard, hoping she couldn't see the way my heart stumbled at that tiny point of contact. She looked back at me then, her expression unreadable, but her eyes holding that same quiet recognition from earlier. We spoke for what must have been half an hour, though it felt much shorter. The noise of the gathering faded into the background until it was just her voice, her presence, her nearness. And when someone else joined the space and our moment broke, I found myself already missing the way it had felt to stand there with her, as if we were hidden in plain sight, wrapped in a small bubble of understanding no one else could see. It was nothing more than a conversation, nothing more than a few accidental touches. But I walked away with the sense that I'd been changed by it. And judging by the faint smile she gave as she turned back into the room, maybe she had, too. The night was winding down. People were gathering coats, finishing the last of their drinks, the easy chatter softening into goodbyes. I should have been thinking about leaving too, but instead, I found myself searching for her in the shifting crowd. She was by the window, away from the center of it all, looking out into the night as though the world outside had pulled her into thought. A street lamp cast a soft glow across her profile, the slope of her cheek, the curve of her lips, the distant calm in her eyes. For a moment, I hesitated. Part of me wondered if I should keep my distance, if maybe I was imagining all of this. But another part, the one that remembered the warmth of her hand brushing mine, refused to let the evening end without one more word. I stepped closer. "Beautiful view," I said quietly, though my eyes weren't on the city lights. She turned, meeting my gaze, and there was something in her smile that felt knowing, like she could tell I wasn't talking about the view at all. "It is," she agreed softly, then paused. "But it can feel lonely too, can it? Watching life move from behind the glass." Her words lingered, carrying more weight than casual conversation. I nodded, sensing something unspoken beneath them. "Yeah, it does." For a moment, silence wrapped around us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that held space for thoughts, for honesty, for the heart to beat just a little louder in your chest. When she finally spoke again, her tone had shifted, softer now. "You remind me of myself years ago. Quiet, observing, like you carry more in your head than you say out loud." I wasn't sure how to respond. She had seen right through me in a matter of hours, and it left me both exposed and strangely grateful. "Maybe," I admitted, my voice low. "But tonight, I don't really want to keep it all in." Her eyes stayed on mine, steady and unflinching, and I could feel the pull between us, subtle, but undeniable. She took a small step closer, just enough that I could feel the faint warmth radiating from her presence. I don't know who moved first, but when our arms brushed again, this time neither of us pulled away. Her hand shifted ever so slightly, her fingers resting against my forearm in a gesture that was gentle, almost protective. The touch was light, yet it grounded me completely. "I should probably go," she whispered, though her hand stayed where it was. "Yeah," I replied, though my voice betrayed the hesitation I felt. But in that small moment, standing side by the window, something had already been set in motion. Something that neither of us could easily step away from. When she finally did move, gathering her things with graceful ease, she left me with a look, one last lingering glance that carried more promise than any words ever could. And I knew, as the door closed behind her, that this wasn't the end. Not even close. The days after that evening stretched longer than usual. I told myself not to think about her, not to replay the moments by the window, not to wonder what that look meant when she left. But the truth was, she lingered in my mind like a song that refuses to fade. When I saw her again, it was almost by chance. Another mutual friends gathering, though smaller this time. I tried to play it cool, to blend into the background as I always did. But the moment she walked into the room, it was as if the air shifted. My chest tightened, my thoughts scattered. She noticed me quickly, her eyes softening with recognition. There was no dramatic moment, no rush across the room. Instead, she simply made her way toward me when the timing felt natural, carrying that same calm poise I had come to recognize. "I wasn't sure you'd be here," she said, her tone casual but edged with something warmer. "I wasn't sure either," I admitted, and that made her laugh gently. We slipped into conversation easily, too easily, and that was where the conflict began to gnaw at me. On the surface, we talked about harmless things, books, travel, the way autumn seemed to carry both beauty and melancholy. But beneath every word, there was an undercurrent. A pull I couldn't deny. And yet, the age difference sat between us like an invisible wall. I found myself overthinking every glance, every smile, wondering if I was imagining the spark. Wondering if she felt it too, or if I was simply projecting what I wanted to believe. At one point, she leaned in a little closer, her hand brushing my sleeve as she reached past me for a plate. The touch was light, but deliberate. My breath caught before I could stop it, and she seemed to notice. Her eyes lingered on mine, searching, as though waiting for me to either step forward or step back. Instead, I froze. My words stumbled into something safe, something bland, and I saw a flicker of something cross her expression, not disappointment, exactly, but understanding. As if she knew the battle I was fighting within myself. We drifted to the edge of the room, away from the noise. She rested her glass on a nearby table and folded her arms loosely, studying me with quiet patience. "You're thoughtful," she said finally, her voice low. "Maybe too thoughtful." I gave a nervous smile. "Is that a bad thing?" "No," she replied softly. "But sometimes, it keeps us from what we really want." Her words cut through me. For a second, I wanted to answer, to tell her that she wasn't wrong, that I felt the same pull she did. But the weight of reality, the differences in our lives, the judgment that might come from others, pressed heavily against my chest. Before I could gather the courage, someone else called her name, and the moment passed. She gave me a small smile, almost bittersweet, and stepped away. I stood there, caught in the quiet storm of my own making. Wanting more. Afraid of it at the same time. And I knew then, this was no simple attraction. It was something deeper, something that would demand honesty. Sooner or later. It was late when we finally found ourselves alone. The gathering had thinned, laughter echoing faintly from another room, but here, in the quiet glow of a single lamp, it felt like the world had narrowed down to just the two of us. She was seated on the couch, her shoes slipped off, one leg tucked beneath her. She looked comfortable yet thoughtful, swirling the last of her drink in the glass. I hesitated at the edge of the room, torn between leaving and staying, but her eyes lifted and caught mine. "You're not much of a goodbye-early type, are you?" she teased softly. I smiled, walking over careful, like each step mattered. "Neither are you." She gestured for me to sit, and I did, though not too close, not yet. The space between us felt deliberate, charged. For a while, we just talked. About nothing and everything. Music that reminded her of her 20s, books I'd been meaning to read, places we both admitted we'd like to escape to one day. But beneath the words, I felt it growing, the weight of the unspoken. Every glance, every pause carried more meaning than the sentences themselves. Then there was silence. Not uncomfortable, not strained. Just silence. The kind that arrives when two people are standing at the edge of something bigger. She set her glass down and leaned back slightly, studying me. Her expression softened, but there was a flicker of caution in her eyes. "You're young," she said finally, the words more a sigh than a statement. I didn't answer right away. The truth of it was obvious, undeniable. But the way she said it wasn't dismissive. It was vulnerable, almost conflicted. "And you're—" I began, then stopped myself, not wanting to label her with something as clumsy as older. I shook my head, trying again. "You're someone I can't seem to ignore." Her lips parted slightly, as though my honesty had startled her. She didn't look away, though. She held my gaze steady, and in that moment, it felt like everything else, the age, the doubts, the expectations, faded into the background. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower. "Do you realize what you're saying?" "Yes," I whispered. "And I think you feel it too." The air between us tightened. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the muffled voices from the other room, but none of it mattered. All that mattered was the way her hands slowly shifted closer on the couch, inch by inch, until her fingers brushed against mine. The contact was subtle, hesitant, yet it carried the weight of a decision. My breath caught, and without overthinking, I turned my palm to meet hers. Our fingers laced together softly, almost shyly, but once they did, either of us pulled away. We sat like that, saying nothing, our hands joined between us. The silence was no longer empty. It was full, overflowing with the things we weren't yet ready to say aloud. And in that fragile stillness, I knew the line had been crossed. There was no going back. The night had grown quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against the walls and makes every sound, every movement feel amplified. Most of the guests had left. Only a faint murmur of voices remained in the background, but here, in this corner of the house, it felt like we were the only two people left in the world. Our hands were still lightly entwined on the couch, but now the silence had deepened into something heavier, more charged. I could feel her thumbs shift, just barely, a small, hesitant stroke against my skin, a gesture so subtle it might have been unintentional, yet it sent a ripple through me. She drew in a breath, steady but fragile, and looked at me in a way that pinned me to the moment. Her eyes weren't playful anymore or guarded. They were open, searching, questioning, as if she was silently asking if I understood what this meant. "I shouldn't," she began, her voice hushed. I leaned in, not enough to close the distance but enough for her to know I was listening with every part of me. "Neither should I." For a heartbeat, we both sat there, suspended between what was safe and what was true. Then, slowly, she shifted closer. I felt the warmth of her knee brush against mine, the faint press of her shoulder against my arm. The contact was small, almost innocent, yet my entire body responded as if it were something much greater. Her hand slipped free from mine only to rest lightly against my arm, her fingers curling into the fabric of my sleeve. The touch was firm now, less hesitant, carrying a quiet need. "I keep telling myself this isn't a good idea," she whispered, eyes lowering briefly before finding mine again. "But you make it very hard to listen to reason." I swallowed, my pulse racing. "Maybe reason isn't what matters right now." Her breath caught at my words. And then, as though something inside her gave way, she leaned into me fully. Her forehead rested against my chest, her hair brushing softly against my chin. I froze, not out of resistance but out of awe. The sheer intimacy of the gesture felt more powerful than anything I had imagined. Slowly, carefully, I lifted an arm around her shoulders, holding her there. She melted into the embrace, her cheek pressing against me, her breath warm and steadying. I could feel the faint rhythm of her heartbeat against my chest, each beat syncing with mine until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Either of us spoke. Words would have only broken the fragile magic of it. Instead, we stayed in that silence, wrapped in something deeper than conversation. When she finally drew back, it was only far enough to look at me, her face so close I could see the subtle flecks of gold in her eyes, the faint curve of a smile trembling on her lips. For a moment, I thought she might kiss me. For a moment, I thought I might kiss her. But instead, she simply whispered, "Don't let this be just tonight." And with that, I knew the peak had been reached. We were no longer circling the edges of something unspoken. We were in it, fully, and neither of us wanted to let go. The night had nearly dissolved into morning by the time we found ourselves standing by the door. The house was quiet now, no lingering voices, no music, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the settling floorboards. She was slipping her shoes back on, graceful even in the small, unremarkable motions. I stood nearby, hands in my pockets, not ready to say goodbye but knowing I had to. The air between us was gentler now, no longer charged with the sharp tension of before. Instead, it carried a quiet steadiness, as though something had been decided without needing to be spoken aloud. When she looked up at me, her expression was softer than I'd ever seen it. "You know," she said lightly, though her voice wavered at the edges, "this is the part where we're supposed to pretend tonight didn't mean what it did." I shook my head, a small smile tugging at my lips. "I don't think I could pretend, even if I tried." Her gaze lingered on me, as though weighing the truth in my words. Then, with a small sigh, she closed the distance between us. She reached up, her fingers brushing against the collar of my jacket, smoothing it in a gesture so tender it nearly undid me. "You have no idea how much you complicate things," she whispered. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," I said quietly. Her hand stilled, and for a heartbeat, I thought she might step back, retreat into reason again. But instead, she let her palm rest flat against my chest. The warmth of her touch seeped through the fabric, steady and grounding. "I've spent years guarding myself," she admitted softly, her eyes glistening with a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. "Telling myself that closeness was too risky, that it was easier to stay untouched." She paused, drawing a breath. "But then you came along, and suddenly, all those walls feel less certain." I covered her hand with mine, pressing it gently against my chest so she could feel the weight of my heartbeat beneath. "I don't want to hurt you," I said. "I don't want this to be some fleeting moment that fades when the sun comes up." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, trembling but real. "Then don't let it fade." The silence that followed was thick with promise. No grand declarations, no need for certainty about the future, just the quiet understanding that what we had found was real enough to carry forward. Before leaving, she leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to my cheek. It was brief, delicate, but the warmth of it stayed long after. At the door, she paused, turning back to look at me one last time. "Call me tomorrow?" There was no hesitation in my reply. "I will." And when she finally stepped out into the early morning air, I felt it, a shift, subtle but profound. This wasn't the end of a night. It was the beginning of something neither of us had expected, but both of us had quietly, desperately longed for. Something worth holding on to. Sparkles that ties the story into a full, warm resolution, no cliffhanger, just the promise of a tender, believable future.